Hey everybody, welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I am your host, Matt Connarton. And before we have a great guest, very excited to talk to this gentleman. We'll get to him in just a moment. But I do want to remind everybody, of course, a little bit of housekeeping. As far as the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, we are, of course, every Tuesday and Thursday night on both IPM Nation on the live station and on DKRN.FM. Quick reminder that this is the final week of DKRN.FM. It has been absorbed, acquired, whatever you want to call it, by Ohm Times Radio. And again, that's Ohm as in OM, as in Ohm. It's not OHM. It's not, for electricians or anything. Ohm Times, you might be familiar with the publication. It's a metaphysical magazine that's been around for quite some time. And they do a lot of, they're a fantastic organization. They're involved in a lot of charity work and are currently doing some of that. Raising money for Nepal, etc. But Ohm Times Radio, it's ohmtimes.com/IOM. Matt Connarton Unleashed will, beginning next week, the radio version will be on both Ohm Times and IPM Nation. So that starts next week. We'll be moving to 11 p.m. Eastern Time every Tuesday and Thursday night. That in no way affects the television edition of the show, which you're watching right now. That will continue same time, same place. And of course, we do get the shows available on demand by 10 p.m. every Wednesday night. But beginning next week, so we got one more night on DKRN.FM Thursday night, and then it's off to a much larger media property with a much larger audience with Ohm Times. They have a global audience, and I'm really, really excited to be going there. Most of the shows from DKRN.FM are going there. Not all of them, but most of them. So I'm really honored to be one of the shows. And we're excited. So that starts next week. Just want to remind you of that. But let's get to our guests. So we have joining us today Ian Freeman from the show Free Talk Live, and of course LRN.FM. Welcome, Ian.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is cool. I'm excited to talk to you. We carry Free Talk Live on IPM Nation.
Thank you.
And very, very excited about that. And I was listening to the show last night. I very often, when I'm at home just working, if I'm doing something that, a lot of my work is done online and just, text stuff or emailing people or whatever. And it's important to me if I'm doing something that doesn't require 100% of my focus, if I'm just doing kind of mindless tasks, it's really important to me to have something to listen to that stimulates me mentally, because if I'm not stimulated mentally, it affects me physically. I'm one of those people who, if I'm not stimulated mentally, I start to feel tired.
Okay, sure.
And kind of drowsy and whatnot. So very often listening to your show keeps me going. I mean, you're on 7 to 10 Eastern Time, so it's not like it's super late. But
right.
But if I've had an early day and I'm just go all day, I need something that does kind of keep me going. So that's one of the things that I enjoy about your show.
Thanks.
And tell us. I want to learn more about your history, but tell us a bit about Free Talk Live. I know your tagline is it's the talk show that you control.
That's right.
And can you kind of explain that a little bit and the concept behind it?
Sure. It's an open phones panel discussion with a pro-liberty viewpoint, and it's syndicated across the United States. Actually, beyond that, we're in Guam and U.S. Virgin Islands.
Yeah.
But we're on over 150 radio stations, and basically it's an open phone show. I mean, there's nothing particularly original about that idea, but when I was growing up, getting into radio and listening to, when I was driving around with my dad as a kid, I listened to a lot of talk radio.
Yeah.
So I didn't like that talk show hosts seemed to always only take the callers that they agreed with, they're very, very specific in their screening policies. And, I had actually tried calling certain talk shows and that didn't go so well. Sometimes you can't even get through based on, not because the phones are busy, but because they just don't want to talk to you.
Exactly.
And so I thought, well, it would be cool to have a talk show which was open phones all the time. And I was also a libertarian, so, I brought that political viewpoint to the table as well. And so that's, I think, what makes Free Talk Live unique, is not that it's an open phone show, but that it's an open phone show with a true pro-liberty perspective that is almost unheard of in syndicated talk radio.
True. And I want to focus for a minute on something you said. Something that I complain about a lot on this show is that so much of media, you've got, people talk about the liberal media all the time. And of course, you've also got a lot of conservative media. And very often people like to exist in their own sort of ideological bubbles. People decide they decide on a particular ideology, and then very often will close themselves off to any outside information, anything that contradicts what they already think. And conservative talk radio specifically, not all of it is like this, but so much of it is, you have whether it's Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham or whoever, you've got a conservative talk show host who only has on conservative guests, and who only, like you were saying, only takes calls from conservative listeners. And if someone calls with any kind of opposing viewpoint at all, wanders at all off the reservation with what they're talking about, they immediately get talked over or demeaned or hung up on or whatever. So it becomes this bubble where, like you were saying, it's hard to even get through to those shows if you disagree even the least little bit. And it's very... Those shows are very they're intellectually lazy because they're all about celebrating everybody agreeing. Yay, we all agree. We all think exactly the same.
Well, they're protected by the call screener, essentially, and that allows them to be intellectually lazy. And so the funny thing is, when you're in the talk radio business, like I go to these talk radio conventions in New York City. There's one every summer. But put on by Talkers Magazine. And you'll hear these guys talk in the industry trades about how much time they spend prepping for their show. It's like, I spent 8 hours today prepping for my show. We come into Free Talk Live, literally, roll in there 10 minutes before the show, sort of throw out the ideas for topics that we have, and then we just go and we see what happens. And that's because we'll come to the table with some sort of topic, but then someone will call in and they'll bring something else up, and we'll go off in that direction and completely change the direction of the show based on somebody's phone call. These other shows can't do that because they have to prepare so much on that one topic. They know they're going to spend an hour on whatever the topic is, and then they research and research and research. That way they can talk and sound really informed on that one topic. But if you were to call in on something that they don't know something about, or that they haven't done all that research on, there's no way you're getting through. And you have to usually tell the phone screener like every single thing you want to say. And if you deviate from that, what you've told that screener, they'll cut you right off the air.
And that's something people who've never called a show like that probably don't realize that it works that way.
Yeah, they probably just think everybody's in the Rush Limbaugh choir that listens to the show.
Right.
So that's what we do differently.
When you were listening to talk radio growing up, was there anyone you heard that you kind of thought, okay, I like this, I like the way they do it, I can model myself after this person, or was it all just kind of that sort of, like I say, that ideological bubble kind of stuff?
There's some outstanding characters in talk radio, and they definitely influenced me. One of them would be Lionel. You familiar with Lionel?
Yes, I am.
So for listeners who don't know, he was on, actually he started in Tampa Bay where I grew up.
I didn't know that.
I'm from Sarasota. He's originally from Tampa. And so he was actually an attorney prior to becoming a talk show host, and he became a talk show host by calling the talk shows. And he was just messing with the talk show hosts, like calling and kind of cranking them, basically.
Really?
And somehow he parlayed that into an opportunity to come in. They invited him to host his own show, and then he ended up getting on WOR in New York City and getting syndicated, and now he does television work in New York City. So he was special because he wasn't your cookie-cutter conservative, nor was he really a liberal. I remember hearing Harry Brown, the libertarian presidential candidate back in the year 2000 and 1996, but in his 2000 campaign, Lionel interviewed him, and for me that was like a really eye-opening interview. I think I'd already heard of Harry Brown at that point, but it was just such a great change from what you typically heard on talk radio, was somebody who was friendly to the ideas of liberty, which is Lionel, talking to this really principled libertarian guy. And it was just a really awesome interview. So he showed me that you could be something besides a cookie-cutter conservative and have a successful talk career. And there were a few others like Dan and Scott, who were an online show back when online shows weren't cool, and before before YouTube, before all the media that we know today online, there was a project called eYada that started in New York City and actually had Lionel on it.
Oh, really?
There was another show called Dan and Scott, and they did a lot of fun stuff, just stuff you couldn't do on the radio, right? Because they were on the internet.
Yeah.
And so this was like back in the year 2000. This was internet streaming way back then.
Yeah.
So it was way ahead of its time, and unfortunately it died as a result.
Yeah. There aren't too many though like that, like Lionel. I mean, because it's so hard, it's but that's kind of true of radio in general too. You've got talk radio obviously is a successful format, and you've got certain formats that are successful and certain formats that are not so successful, and the not so successful ones, it's very tough.
Well, they don't want to step outside the box.
Right.
They have what they believe works, and
exactly.
this is talk radio, and
and
they don't want to take a risk, and it's too bad too, because there's a lot of talent out there that could use an opportunity like that. And it's hard to build an independent show like we've done, because usually the standard model is you have to get picked up by one of these big syndicates like Premier Radio Networks, which is owned by Clear Channel, formerly Clear Channel, now called iHeartMedia.
Yeah.
And if you are one of their properties, they are totally in control of your content, and you step out of line and you're done. If you don't make the performance they're looking for in 6 months, you're done.
Oh yeah.
And we were fortunate to we started in Florida, and a couple years after it got syndicated on Genesis Communications Network, which was a smaller syndicate at the time. They're doing much, they're larger now than they were previously.
Yeah.
And they used to be sort of like the Kook Network with a bunch of crazy shows like Alex Jones.
Yeah.
And we kind of helped to break them out of that mold. We were really their kind of standout show that, we quickly racked up more affiliates, more radio stations than Alex Jones had.
No kidding.
And so we really kind of helped bring them into the mainstream, and now they've gotten more mainstream names like Dr. Joy Brown and other big name. Doug Steffen is on there as well. So some big name hosts are now with GCN. So it's kind of been fun to grow with them. And one of the nice things about them is their program director's got like 6 channels that he's dealing with. He can't spend any time with any of the shows to actually coach them or anything like that. That's bad for the people who don't know what they're doing.
Right.
But for Free Talk Live, there's no hands-on from the network. We just get to create the product that we want to put out there, and they put it out there on the satellite for stations to pick up. And I, during my daytime hours, usually am, if I'm not driving to Manchester to be on your show, I would be calling radio stations to pitch the show to them. So there's a lot that I do behind the scenes. Whereas your typical talk show host is like just talent. They just want to come in, talk into a microphone, and get a paycheck.
Right.
I actually run a lot of the business side of the show as well.
Right. So at what point? So you started it was 2002 when you started.
That's right.
When you started in Florida. Okay. And then how long did it take you to get to the point where Genesis was? Did they approach you, or did you approach them?
I approached them. It was actually. It's one of those radio coincidences, I guess, although some would say there are no coincidences. It was actually the Harry Brown show, the presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. He had a weekend show, and Genesis was syndicating that program. I was at a station in Sarasota, Florida. I wasn't the program director, but there really wasn't a program director. So I suggested to the owner, hey, why don't we put this Harry Brown show on Saturday nights? And he said, fine. So I called Genesis, the syndicate, and I said, hey, can we, add that show to the station? And I just happened to ask. I said, hey, are you also looking for any new programming? And they said, sure, send a demo. So I sent them a demo, and we got added on Saturday nights. And then 3 weeks later, Genesis asked us to go on weeknights.
Yeah, wow.
And now we're 7 nights a week.
Which is amazing, because there are very few shows that are, usually if a show is daily, in broadcasting, that means it's Monday through Friday. It doesn't literally mean daily. You're one of the... I can't even think of another show off the top of my head.
Coast to Coast AM, the overnight show.
Right, okay, that's right. I used to listen to that, actually,
But besides them, I think that's about it.
Yeah, literally daily. And you're on, what, 4 or 5
6 days.
Oh, you're on 6 days, okay.
I co-host the show with Mark Edge, who also does the sales end of the show. So between the two of us, we kind of run a syndicated show together. And so we cross over the week. So I'm actually taking tonight off, so I won't be on Free Talk Live tonight.
Yeah.
So I take a weekday off, whatever one I want, and then he's picked Friday as his day off. So we have other co-hosts who are in the Keene area where we produce the show that come in and they add their voice to the mix. And I like that, because I get, I don't really want to listen to myself talk, even though that's my job. I don't like to listen to myself, so I do like to hear what other people have to say.
Right.
And so it's nice to have someone else in the studio to bring a slightly different perspective to the table.
Oh, of course. Do you ever find yourself in a situation where you're stuck there alone?
You know what? There has been a couple times where I've gone for like a segment of the show, but usually somebody else will show up, and
that's good.
And I can drag somebody else in. I could do it if I needed to. I mean, I've got the show prep, and I could talk to myself if necessary.
Yeah.
But thankfully, I've never had to do that. I don't want to do that show.
Yeah.
I don't want to. I've never wanted to do that show because I'm just not that interested in what. Hearing myself talk for 3 hours.
Sure.
I'm just, I want to do the show I want to listen to. I mean, that's how I figure out what is good to me. It's like, I don't want to do the show that the radio executives want. I don't want to do the show that the typical listener is looking for. I want to do the show that I want, and then I know that I'll attract the right audience because of that.
Exactly. And when did you come to New Hampshire? Are you a Free Stater?
I am a Free State Project participant. I'm an early mover. I moved here in 2006 to the Keene area.
What's your mover number? Do you know?
420.
420? Oh, no kidding. That's awesome. So what year was that? 2006?
2006,
okay.
Labor Day.
So, and obviously, you just moved the show with you.
That's right. We packed up the studio. We finished our Saturday show on, this was when we didn't have a live Sunday show. So we finished our Saturday show, drove 26 hours straight to come here, and had the show. We missed one show because I didn't have the studio set up in time for Monday night.
Yeah.
And then that Tuesday, we were back on the air. And we didn't even tell anyone we were gonna do it.
Really?
We just left Florida, and then Tuesday we were live from New Hampshire.
That's amazing. Did the change in climate bother you at all at first?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Florida native, so
and
you can see I don't have much skin on my bones. So yeah, I get pretty cold easily, but it's okay. It's a warm place, full of warm people and good people, and I just love New Hampshire. It's such a great place.
Jen always talks about I forget, I can't remember who it was that said it to her, but when she was first thinking about moving here, and I don't remember her mover number or anything, and I'm from here originally myself.
Oh,
but,
cool.
But she was talking about, someone said to her, well, isn't a little bit of cold worth the price of liberty? Or something to that effect, and that made her think, okay, I guess I'll do it.
Yeah, and that was my concern. I first heard about the Free State Project. I thought, wow, it's a great idea. I mean, libertarianism isn't doing much of anything anywhere, so if we concentrate people, that makes sense. But gosh, it's cold in New Hampshire, and I don't know about that. So it took me a little while to really get through that. And I came to a similar conclusion. Like, if this is where people who are like me are going to be, and are going to be doing things, because I was an activist in Florida as well.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to really make anything happen down there. And that's true in most cases for most places for libertarians.
Sure.
So I just thought, whatever it takes, I'm going to go and be a part of this.
Yeah.
And, as I was driving here, I saw one of those kind of classic New Hampshire, at least I consider this like a classic New Hampshire situation where, just that people are so kind in New Hampshire and so neighborly with one another. So I'm driving down 101, coming to Manchester, and I can see ahead in the road, there's a guy stopped, traffic's stopping up behind him. He's like struggling with this big couch to try to like all by himself put this couch back in the back of his truck. I guess it had fallen out. I presume it had fallen out because, he's trying to get it back in. He's in the middle of the road, basically, or on the side of the road. And then, the guy who's coming up in front of me in my lane, because I'm coming that direction towards this, he stopped. So both sides of the road have stopped. And I'm like, well, I was willing to get out and help him, but I knew somebody else had already beaten me to it, right?
Right, yeah.
The lady behind him had already gotten out of her van. This guy in front of me was getting out of his car, and they were keen on going to help this guy out, get this couch back in his car. And there are places in the country where everybody's just going to drive by.
Of course.
And I just thought, that's New Hampshire.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Can you talk a little bit about LRN, Liberty Radio Network?
Sure. That's a project I put together in 2009. Once again, because I felt that there was a void in the audio space.
Sure.
There's obviously plenty of conservative and liberal programming out there. There's shows that call themselves Liberty, but they're really just crazy kook shows.
Do you mean like when you say that?
Like conspiracy theory, like, aliens, lizard people,
right?
The Illuminati. I mean, I'm not saying there's no Illuminati, but come on. I mean, it's just building a whole show around these things. It doesn't lend credibility to the ideas of freedom, in my opinion. And
by the way, do you think that's part of what is responsible for the misconceptions? Because some people have these really wild misconceptions about Free Staters. And I think in the minds of some people, they think that Free Staters are conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hat wearing people who believe that the world is run by reptilian shapeshifters or whatever. I mean, do you think that part of what's responsible for that is these kooks who present themselves as liberty people, and that maybe contributes to that?
I don't know. That's hard to really say because you'd have to ask every individual what they think about the Free State Project and Free Staters. I mean, everybody has different opinions on that. I mean, whenever I hear someone saying something to me about, well, I don't like this or that, it usually has more to do with something that I've done or some other activist has done.
Okay.
Some sort of activism, whether it's smoking cannabis in Central Square or a topless event or something like that. There's certain things that rub someone the wrong way.
Sure.
And they'll jump to conclusions. Or worse, they've not ever seen or heard anything that we've done, and they've just heard rumors about some of the things that some activists have done, and they've jumped to conclusions based on that. Most of these shows that are the conspiracy shows that I'm talking about are so irrelevant that the average person on the streets is not going to know about it. Of course, the average person on the streets probably doesn't know about the Free State Project either.
True.
So there's that. And so I saw this space, and I thought, well, there are these great liberty shows, and some of them are on some of these networks, like they're in amongst all these crazy kook shows. There's somebody with some good ideas in there.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I wanted to put together a network of really principled, liberty-oriented shows, because nothing's worse than somebody out there claiming to be a libertarian and at the same time advocating for, the war on drugs or a war in another country or closing the borders or some other, anti-liberty idea.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to have a more pure, I guess, political viewpoints. And generally, you want to be welcoming in the libertarian movement of people who have not purist ideas, because we want to be a big tent and bring people in and educate them. But when you're running a radio network, which is supposed to propagate those ideas, you don't want to be welcoming to people who, as far as show hosts, you want to make sure, I want to make sure that this person, has their chops when it comes to the ideas of freedom. Because for me, LRN isn't about running a commercial operation. It's a hobby first and foremost, because I like to do it. But I also want to propagate these ideas as effectively as possible. So it exists for two reasons. One was because I know Free Talk Live isn't the right show for everyone. You enjoyed it, and thank you for that. But somebody else might listen, and they might not like the way I sound, or they might not like Mark's attitude, or whatever, and it might be a turnoff for them for whatever reason. So I thought, well, let's, give people an opportunity to learn about other shows that have a similar viewpoint, but have a different approach maybe to how they communicate it, different sounds to the hosts that are on the air. And so it was just acknowledging that, hey, Free Talk Live isn't right for everyone, but there are shows that might be better for those people. So let's put them all in the same place. And that was the idea there. So basically, to promote my competition was essentially what I was doing there. And then secondarily was to create a sort of a plug-and-play audio feed for people who wanted to put together their own radio stations. I've always been a big fan of pirate radio. Ever since I was a teenager, it was something I wanted to do. And I thought, well, the best thing to do, because my parents weren't going to let me put up a pirate radio rig in my house, so I figured, well, the best thing to do between now and my pirate radio days someday would be to learn radio. And so I joined and worked for a real radio station, Clear Channel, in Sarasota, Florida, and kind of learned the business, and now I'm doing Free Talk Live. And so the idea was, if you're going to run a pirate radio station, programming is the hardest part. It's easy to, relatively simple, as long as you have a somewhat technical mindset to put together a transmitter and audio sources and things like that, and get it on the air physically. But to come up with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of programming for that radio station is, as you've learned, I'm sure, a little bit more challenging. So that's the other purpose to LRN.FM.
Well, we cheat with the IPM Nation live station. We also have a lot of music on there. So
there you go.
That kind of gets us around that. I said from the beginning, I'm not going to call this just an all-talk station. Because, oh my God, partly because of what you were just talking about.
You don't want to have to loop the same 4 hours for 24 hours a day, right? And that was an initial challenge with LRN was, I brought in these podcasts, and there was only so many Liberty podcasts that I could add in. Now it's not so much a problem. We have some live shows, some great live shows, like the Scott Horton Show. He's on during middays. Ernie Hancock is on from Arizona during the mornings. He gets up at 4 in the morning so he can be on at 6 Pacific and 9 a.m. Eastern. So we've got some really dedicated show hosts who I don't pay a dime to do their shows. I don't have a dime to pay them. But I have the airtime, and they they're willing to do it just because they love to do it, and I think that's really cool. So we've got dozens of shows now on LRN.FM.
Yeah, you do. I'm curious too. You were talking about you don't necessarily want to be welcoming to the kooks. Do you ever have...
I welcome the callers, but I don't want to put them on...
But not the hosts as hosts, right? I'm curious, does anyone ever approach you? Have you ever had a kook approach? I mean, I'm not asking you to name names, but has anyone ever said, hey, I want to be a part of LRN, and then you check out what they're doing and you're like, no?
Well, that's not just kooky people, but also, like I've had a variety of people send me a message online saying, hey, you should add my show. And you can tell some of them haven't even looked at the network. They don't even,
really?
They're like, oh, it's a radio network. They send off their
Sure.
demo or whatever, and they don't even understand, what it is that they're really pitching to.
Yeah.
And so they don't get on as a result of that.
Right, of course.
And I would like to clear something up. I don't think that conspiracies aren't real, that there aren't,
Sure.
the government didn't kill JFK or whatever. It's just,
Sure.
to me, focusing on conspiracy is a distraction.
Right.
And, you could spend, and they do on these conspiracy shows, you can spend hours and hours and hours delving into 9/11. And,
well, that's what AM Coast to Coast is. I mean, you mentioned that earlier.
But they talk about ghosts and things like that, too.
Right,
But,
they do.
like the hardcore conspiracy theory stuff, like Alex Jones, for instance, who I have a lot of respect for and I've met, and I love the work that he does on the police state.
Yeah.
I think he does some really important work there.
Yeah.
But to go off into the world of conspiracy is trying to prove something to people that you don't really have to spend time on in order to show them that the government is, as it is, the state is immoral as an
Sure.
agency and it shouldn't exist. It hurts peaceful people. I can show stories about the state hurting peaceful people all day long from the regular news, where I don't have to go and theorize about what temperature thermite will melt steel at and bring in scientific experts. I don't have to do that stuff to show people that the state is evil. And a lot of the people who run these conspiracy shows aren't libertarians anyway.
Yeah.
They just want to get their guys in to the state.
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. With Alex Jones, I've always kind of wondered, and I like him. I like him as a radio personality. And I think he's interesting, and I respect what he's accomplished.
He's a character, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. But I also, too, I look at a guy like him and I wonder, does he even believe any of his own BS, or is this a character that he's created?
That's a great question.
And
some people say he's Bill Hicks.
Yeah.
That's the Alex Jones conspiracy, is that he's actually Bill Hicks.
I've heard that, yeah. Well, I actually heard him address that directly when he was on Opie and Anthony once, and they were giving him a hard time. And, are you really Bill Hicks? Yeah, my own personal policy on the conspiracy stuff has been I don't buy into really much or any of it, but I don't roll my eyes at these people either, because truth often is stranger than fiction.
Oh, no doubt.
And who knows? Maybe some of it's true. Maybe all of it's true. I mean, I doubt.
I'll hear them out. I mean, we've had plenty of people. It's open phones on Free Talk Live, so I mean, call in with any conspiracy you want. Some of them hold more water than others.
Sure.
And
you guys are very, from what I've listened to, you guys are very respectful in that way.
Try to be.
Yeah.
Unless somebody's being openly rude and disrespectful,
right.
Then
Of
they'll
course.
probably get a little bit of that back.
Of course. Yeah. And
but I love contrarian callers. I mean, they're my favorites. I don't want to talk to people who agree with me. That's not very interesting to me. I'd much rather have a challenging call.
Exactly. Well, like I was saying earlier, I mean, if you can listen to conservative talk radio if you want to hear a bunch of people sitting around agreeing with each other.
Right.
I get the impression, because you said you were a kid when you started listening to talk radio,
a teenager.
Which is okay. Did you become interested in this stuff at a very early age in terms of politics and liberty and things like that?
I don't know how very early, but as a young teenager, I would say my dad was more of a Republican at that time. We both kind of became libertarian together in the 1990s when I was growing up. And so I think, he definitely played a role in that. And at some point I found Harry Brown, the Libertarian presidential candidate, and he wrote a great book in 1996 called Why Government Doesn't Work. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was a real eye-opener of a book.
Now, are you a big L libertarian, as in you're actually a member of the Libertarian Party, or is it...
So yes and no. I actually publicly resigned from the National Libertarian Party back in 2008 because I was frustrated, and still am to a lesser extent. I don't really care as much now, but at that time I was frustrated with how the party had kind of strayed from its principles. It's supposed to be the party of principle. You're supposed to sign a statement when you join the party saying, I don't support or advocate the initiation of force to achieve political or social goals. And then I saw people who called themselves libertarians, who were signed party members, members advocating the initiation of force to achieve political or social goals. And I just thought, well, this party's jumped the shark. And then to prove it, they brought Bob Barr on as their presidential candidate in the year 2008.
I forgot about that. He talk about characters. That guy's a character.
Well, yeah, and he doesn't belong in the Libertarian Party, in my opinion. And, if Bob Barr's really changed his mind, then, goddess bless him for it, and great. I'm glad to hear about that. But the things that were coming out of his mouth didn't sound particularly libertarian in that case. And I actually had resigned before that, just because, I saw the writing on the wall for years about how things were getting worse. And I was a life member of the party. So usually when you're a member of a political party, you're just an average member, you can just let your membership lapse. I had to call National and, tell them I wanted to resign because I was a life member. So, but I am a member of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party.
Okay,
so,
the
Libertarian Party of New Hampshire.
I'm sort of familiar with what it's like to leave a party. I was a Democrat up until about mid 2000s, maybe 2006, and then I decided to bolt and become an independent. To be honest with you, of the I call them the big three isms, conservatism, liberalism, libertarianism. All of them have aspects of them that I identify with and agree with, and all of them have things about them that concern me. But one of the things that drove me out of being a Democrat was becoming an entrepreneur and a business owner, et cetera. I feel it's very difficult in this country to be an entrepreneur and be a Democrat because of the way government just makes it very difficult. Even on a local level, I mean, this city we're in, Manchester, and I know we have viewers elsewhere, but they're notoriously hostile to business, especially new business trying to come in. We've seen what's gone on with Uber recently and whatnot.
Oh, it's horrible.
So it is. And but I must say, of the big three, I think I at this point in my life certainly identify with libertarianism the most.
Well, it's the most moral philosophy out there. I mean, if you're a moral person who cares about freedom, then there's no other choice.
Right.
Now, I actually helped found the New Hampshire Liberty Party a couple of years ago with some of the folks out in Keene.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we created the New Hampshire Liberty Party is because of the frustrations with the Libertarian Party. They seem relatively impotent here in New Hampshire, and I think that's partially because the ballot access laws here are so terrible. They're written to prevent third parties from getting on the ballot. You can't even register as anything besides Republican, Democrat, or undeclared.
The system protects itself. And,
So we created the New Hampshire Liberty Party to create competition for the Libertarian Party, and also have a principled liberty. Instead of this sort of weak liberty that the Libertarian Party stands for these days, to be more principled in our stance, and also to advocate for secession for New Hampshire as well, because the Libertarian Party doesn't really seem to want to touch that issue. And so that's one of the main thrusts. It, in fact, is the main thrust of the New Hampshire Liberty Party, is to set New Hampshire free from the United States.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I want to back up a little bit too about speaking about the the libertarians in New Hampshire, and you said that they've been largely impotent. Do you think part of that is they've been and some folks I know get a little defensive about this. People who are still people who, let me put it this way, people who self-identify as both libertarian and Republicans. People who are active in the Republican Party who identify themselves as they're definitely sticking with the party. They're never going to not be Republicans, but they consider themselves libertarians. And many of the guests I've had on this show are kind of work within that paradigm. And their rationale is because I often will ask them, well, if you're a libertarian, wouldn't you like to at some point build up enough steam, so to speak, with the Libertarian Party that you can challenge the two-party system and be a more, I don't want to say more active, but maybe relevant's not even the right word, but it's the best word I can come up with, a more relevant force in terms of that, have that third spot on the debate stage, whatever. Instead of just saying, well, we're going to throw in with the Republicans, especially when, if you go issue by issue, I feel that libertarianism has just as much in common with liberalism.
I'm a registered Democrat.
Actually, are you? Okay.
As a matter of fact,
interesting.
Yeah. Because I agree with where you're coming from there. I find it's easier to communicate the ideas of liberty to people who are on the left, even though I'm originally, from a Republican family and was, I guess, I was never registered as a Republican, but my parents were, so
I
was brought up with that. But despite that, I still feel like I can better communicate with people that are coming from the left perspective, because I feel like, at least in their minds, they feel like they care about people. And I'm not saying that conservatives don't care about people, but I feel like there's a story that a liberal would tell themselves about that.
Right.
And I think that libertarian, or being a liberty-minded person, and liberty is the most caring philosophy, because it encourages people to help one another on a voluntary basis, on a consensual basis, rather than being forced by some government authority to help somebody. So to me, it's not virtuous unless you choose to do it. And so that's what I want to encourage with folks. And that's one of the reasons I ran as a Democrat for governor this last election.
I didn't realize that.
Maggie Hassan. I challenged Maggie Hassan.
I had no idea.
Well, the media didn't spend a whole lot of time talking to me. But this comes back around to what you were saying. I'd love to see the Libertarian Party on stage at a gubernatorial debate. But it's not happening. And I don't blame anybody for saying, well, I want to do something now, so join the Republicans, join the Democrats, whatever. We do have liberty-oriented state reps who are both Democrat and Republican. And so if that's what it takes to get people who love freedom in the state house and in the state senate or whatever, then whatever. I don't care what your label is that you put on yourself. What are your ideas? What are you saying? What are you advocating?
Right. Yeah, I know that and I also talk to a lot of Republicans who are more sort of establishment Republicans who get frustrated that, they feel that the libertarians in the Republican Party, they call them rhinos, and
too bad for them. Here's what I have to say to those people. It's ironic that they're frustrated now, because the libertarians for years have been saying, hey, give us fair ballot access. Because right now, if you want to go run as a Republican or Democrat for state rep, it's $2 to go and file. If you're a Libertarian or a Green Party or whoever, you've got to get 150 petition signatures from within that district in which you're running. And that's a lot of work. I mean, I understand people looking at this, it's only 150. Well, that's, a lot of knocking on doors or a lot of standing downtown. And it is slow going to try to get those petition signatures. That's why you usually have to hire a professional to go out and do it at $1 per petition. So even if you were to hire a professional, you're still looking at $150 to run as an independent candidate. And it's just not fair. So you've got these Republicans and Democrats who have for years supported the ballot access restrictions. Now they're complaining because the Libertarians are running as Republicans and Democrats. Well, you can't have it both ways.
That's a very good point. I'd never thought of it quite that way, but you're right.
So if they loosen up the ballot access restrictions, maybe that won't be as much of a problem for them, or maybe it's just too little too late at this point, and they're always going to have to deal with the Libertarians and their parties.
I'm going to quote that next time I hear a Republican complaining about the Libertarians, because that's a very good point. I'd never thought of it that way, but you're right.
Darryl Perry is one of the co-chairs of the New Hampshire Liberty Party, and he spends a lot of time in the elections committee at the state house. He's sort of like adopted the committee, and he really knows his stuff about elections. He's like an encyclopedia of knowledge about how these things work. And so he's actually put forward, through another state rep, some proposals to make ballot access more fair. Not totally fair, just more fair. A little bit lessen the requirements, that kind of thing. And that just gets back. It gets ITL'd every time. One thing that Republicans and Democrats agree on is they don't want more competition for politicians.
Exactly. I feel too that they've rigged the system, and I don't mean necessarily just in New Hampshire, but in the macro, the way that problems don't get solved, issues don't get resolved, I think largely because they have this adversarial system. Whatever one side is for, the other side has to be against. It always has to be that way. And there's really no money in solving problems. In other words, both parties are very effective at raising money, saying, well, you got to donate to us because we got to fight the other guys on what they're trying to do. And, nothing ever gets, I talk about, like the border, you've got a lot of Republicans who are very upset that we have, undocumented workers here, et cetera. I don't call them illegal aliens or anything.
They're human beings.
Exactly. That I think it's very demeaning the way some people speak about these people.
Sure. Might as well just call them Japs or Jinx or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. But, it's funny, I'll hear Republicans talk about wanting to build a fence, and I always say, well, when W was in office, we had 8 years of a Republican president. How much of that fence got built? Not very much, because they're
not only 8 years of Republican president, but you also had 6 years of total Republican control.
Oh yeah, exactly. And you know,
and what about small government? I mean, isn't that a bigger government program? Isn't that increasing the size of the state? Oh, you want small government, but you want to make the state bigger? Come on.
Yeah, there's a lot of
consistency.
There's a lot of big government conservatives out there. Yeah. Definitely. And but I know why they don't. You know, when they have the opportunity to do what they talk about wanting to do, they don't do it. And I know why. It's better for them if it never gets done. They can pay all this lip service to it, so they can get those votes and all those people out there going, "Yeah, we got to do something about these Mexicans." But then they don't follow through on anything. They try hard to kind of sort of look like they're trying to follow through on it, but they don't follow through on it because got to keep raising that money.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, and that's one of the things that frustrates me about national politics. And I guess that's probably true to some extent in New Hampshire as well. There are all these organizations who exist on this, and they keep sending those fundraising letters. And it's funny when you read them because there's certain terminology that are always present. It's like, it's a battle, we're in a fight. You know, like you see battle and fight in there a bunch of times, and we're gonna win. We got to show up at the battle and this and that. And you know, cut your check now. And then a month later, there's another one coming in.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's just a hamster wheel.
Yeah.
But you know, it's nice in New Hampshire because you can actually have an effect, and we've seen that the Liberty reps, for lack of a better term, have had an impact there in the State House. And it's, you know, the Free State Project hasn't even triggered the move yet.
Right.
The idea is to move 20,000 liberty-oriented people to New Hampshire to get active. We're in a pre-mover stage, basically, like an early mover stage, and we're probably not going to hit 20,000 until 2017, and then there's a 5-year window.
Yeah.
So if already Free Staters are being called the single greatest threat to the state, that was what Cynthia Chase said out in Keene.
Yeah.
She's a state rep.
Yeah.
If already we're being called that, and we've only had, you know, 1,000, 1,500 people move here, just imagine, you know, what it's going to be like in another 10 years.
Right, absolutely. Can you tell us a little bit more about, do you describe yourself as an anarchist,
No.
a minarchist? Or,
I'm a voluntarist.
Okay.
I don't like the term anarchist because I think it has a connotation of bomb throwing or destruction of property.
Right.
You know, you see in the G20 protests, people with masks on throwing Molotov cocktails or throwing garbage cans through windows.
Right.
To me, violence isn't a solution to the state. That's the tool that the state uses.
Right.
And so I, as somebody who likes the idea of being a moral person, do not want to lower myself to the state's level. So I consider violence their tool, not mine. Peace is the way to go if that's what I want to achieve, which is what I want. I want to live in a peaceful world where people who are peaceful are not aggressed against by the people calling themselves the state, or anyone for that matter.
Yeah.
And violence is, in my mind, only acceptable in response to violence in self-defense.
Sure.
So I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, anarchist, not right for me, because it also there's another connotation that it means no rules.
Right.
And the semantics folks would argue that it means no rulers, but even if that's true, I still rule myself, so that still wouldn't be an accurate term for me. I believe in self-rule, self-governance.
Right.
Maybe a more appropriate term, Mark Edge, my co-host, says auto-archist, you know, which means rule of oneself.
Okay.
But I like voluntarist because I think voluntarist really defines what I believe, and what I believe is that all human interaction should be on a consensual basis. And that's how most interaction between humans operates. You and I are here by consent. You're here by consent of the television station. Everybody here agrees to be together and to do what we're doing.
Right.
No one had to be forced into the situation that we're in today.
Right.
It's only common criminals and government people who force people to do things against their will. And if we can eliminate that aggressive force from society, I think we'll have a better society for it.
How limited should government be?
I think government, as we know it, should go away. I think that the state is a decrepit old idea that is a terrible idea that has for hundreds of years justified violence against peaceful people. And it's inappropriate to use violence against your neighbor to achieve what you want. And that's what the state is. It's a way for your neighbors to force you, or you to force your neighbors to do something that they may not want to do, or to not do things that they do want to do.
Sure.
And as long as those things are peaceful, then they should be able to do them, whether it's, possessing a drug or it's opening a business or whatever. You shouldn't have to ask some bureaucrat's permission or fear being put into a cage because you haven't harmed anyone else.
Right.
So to me, that's what being a voluntarist is all about. It's about spreading the idea that human interaction should be based on consent.
Okay. But we do need, would you agree? I mean, we do need things like, do we need police?
Sure. I think protection is desirable, right?
Yeah.
Like, so some people want to have that feeling of feeling safe, and they can't provide that for themselves. They might not be a karate master or something like that. So you hire the karate master or whoever, the guys who know what they're doing.
Right.
And whether it's to patrol a neighborhood or to keep an eye on a business or to be 24-hour security around you or whatever, there's different levels of private security that are available.
Yeah.
And the government police are, I know some of them do the best they can.
Sure.
But ultimately they are a monopoly on protection. They offer certain services that no one else is allowed to offer. If you go out and try to compete with them, they'll call you a competing gang.
That's true.
And you'll be put into the cage.
Right.
And so I advocate for competition in the area of protection services instead of this one-size-fits-all government police. If the government police or whatever government program we're talking about is so valuable, why can't they offer it on a consensual basis? Like, I want to pay for roads to be cleared. I don't want to see that service go away.
Sure.
I just don't like the way it's currently funded, where they threaten to take my house away from me if the taxes aren't paid on it.
Right.
That's stealing in my mind, because I don't think the government owns my house, but they do. Because if you don't pay the property taxes, they'll prove that they own your house by tax sailing it out from under you to somebody else.
Right.
So I don't think that's okay. That seems very wrong to me, to threaten someone with expulsion from their own home.
Sure.
If they don't want to pay for something. So like a good example of something I don't want to support is a government school. I don't like the viewpoints that are being inculcated into students at the government school. Many times those viewpoints are pro-state. They
Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
That's indoctrination.
Perfect example of it. That's total indoctrination, and I don't want to pay for that. That doesn't mean I don't support education.
Right.
I love the idea of unschooling, homeschooling, private schools, small little groups of homeschoolers, whatever. Anything that people can come up with that they think is best. Let the market decide how to educate, and then let me decide as an individual which educational solutions I support, and I can put my money behind that. Again, then rather than sending it off to some centralized bureaucracy who's going to give most of the money to the bureaucrats at the top of the system, and then the teachers will scrape by on something at the bottom.
Right.
So I support having a lot of these things that the government currently provides, but just not having a monopoly service providing it. One of the things that people in New Hampshire might not really realize in certain places, like, it was a shock to me when I moved up to Keene, because there's no government garbage collection.
Really?
Private garbage collection? You actually have to call up and find the best price for the garbage collection and or do it yourself, right? You can take it out to the dump, the transfer station yourself. And where I come from, it's always been the government that's taken care of the garbage. And so people in Florida or in these other places where it's this government thing for garbage, they would be shocked to learn. What? You don't need the government to take care of the garbage?
Right.
No, you don't, because things that people want, the market will provide.
Yeah. What about something like prisons? Because on the one hand, you could say, for example, I at one time, because I generally agree with what you're saying in terms of the free market and whatnot, but at one time I supported the idea of private prisons.
Yeah.
Because, that idea that, well, what the government does, the free market can do better, et cetera. And I've completely flipped on that.
This isn't a free market, the current situation. Yeah. The reason why the private prisons are so bad is because they're essentially just replacing the government monopoly. Whenever you... The term privatize is what this tends to mean is where government will select a new monopoly provider rather than the government to do it. They'll select some other, private company which ostensibly could do a better job, but not always, right? So because they don't have the market incentives to compete and provide better innovation, lower prices, better service, things like that, because they're still a monopoly.
Right. And that's not really the free market either. If the government is selecting, you hear this term a lot, no bid contract and whatnot. If the government is selecting who's going to pick up that function. It's an old boy
system. It's a good old boy network.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to get an improvement. And so the same thing's true of what do they call it? Charter schools. So sometimes the charter school could do better than government. Sometimes it doesn't do better because they're still following a lot of the same government rules. They're still working within that system. So I don't support privatization either because it's just picking somebody's buddy to perform the same service that the government was performing. But to answer your question in more detail requires more time, because now we're really talking about a total change to the system. Right now, I think some simple things can be done to make the current system better, like ending victimless crime laws, to where the police aren't enforcing the war on drugs or the war on prostitution or gambling, and focus on actual crimes. I think that would make the government monopoly police a lot better than they currently are, and a lot more oriented towards their customers, so to speak.
Exactly.
But there's a great book called The Market for Liberty that I actually turned into an audiobook. I didn't write it. I just read it into audio. And it was written in the 1970s by Morris and Linda Tannehill. And they spend several chapters explaining how a marketplace could provide justice and protection services. And they do such a great job. I would do a disservice to it to try to really delve into it. But essentially the idea would be that you would have competing arbitrators rather than a one-size-fits-all monopoly court system. The arbitrators could be more professional in the area in which they're arbitrating. So if it was contract law or something like that, the judge or whoever the arbitrator would be would really know their stuff in that one area. The participants, the plaintiff and defendant, if you will, would have to agree on the arbitrator, and a lot of those agreements would be done in advance. So if we were to get into a contract, let's say you were an insurance provider and I was a customer, it would be in the contract that if there's a dispute, well, we would go to this arbitrator. And in point of fact, those already exist, which is interesting. There's the American Arbitration Association and other organizations. If you look at like your cell phone contract, nobody reads these things, right? But if you actually look at the contract, it says things like, I agree to not take any case against, cell phone company provider to court. I agree that I will take it to an arbitrator, this particular arbitrator. Really? So it's right there in the contract, and this already exists today. It would just be taking that to the next level, where that would then happen for things like criminal acts as well. And then you get into another discussion about, well, what if someone doesn't want to go to court, right? Because then that's the big thing. If both sides are consenting, well, why would a criminal want to go into this court? And so if the criminal cares about their reputation, there could be a reputation system that could really, ding their reputation if they don't go and participate in this. But further, if we're talking about violent crime, then I don't have a problem with having some bounty hunter go and collect somebody who is a violent criminal. If somebody's out there committing murder or rape or something like that, obviously people want that to stop, and so the marketplace will come up with mechanisms to prevent that, whether it's insurance companies or protection companies or whoever it is that's providing that service. They're going to go and they're going to take that dangerous person off the streets. Now, what makes that a better situation than what we have today is right now when the police get the wrong guy and they convict the wrong guy and send the wrong guy to prison, we all pay for it.
Right.
And when that person gets out of prison, if they're lucky enough to have their case overturned 20 years later, they finally get out, they get a $4 million check. It's not the prosecutor who's paying that price.
Right.
It's not the police who botched the investigation.
Right.
It's you and I through the tax dollars.
Exactly.
In the situation I'm talking about, if a private company picks you up and they say, Matt, we think you've raped somebody or whatever. You're like, whoa, that wasn't me, and all the evidence will show. They would have to have evidence, because if they have kidnapped you, which is what they have done, if you are an innocent person and they have kidnapped you, then they're not going to be able to prove that you did this crime in theory, right? And if they can't prove it, and if they fail to prove that you've done this, then they're fully liable for kidnapping in that case. If they do get the right guy, great, they got the right guy. And keep that person off the streets. But it would bring a level of accountability to the justice system that it currently doesn't have, and it currently can't have, because the system's a monopoly. The system is completely unaccountable, or near to unaccountable, for mistakes. And when they do make mistakes, you and I get stuck with the bill rather than the people who made the mistakes. And so if a protection company arrests the wrong person in a marketplace of justice, then they would face consequences for it, in theory at least. These are just some ideas as to how it could look, right? I can't predict exactly how the market would provide these services, but competition generally brings a better service and a better product at a lower price.
Right. We're almost out of time, but
there you go.
But one of my one of my key arguments against the death penalty has always been that so often, it's not a far out there example that you used. When people are picked up for crimes that they didn't commit and they're sentenced and sent to prison for a long time, and it's one of the reasons why this state cannot be allowed to continue to execute people, in my opinion, because these kinds of mistakes do happen. They continue to happen.
Hundreds, or at least 100 people have been released from death rows who were innocent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the question is, how many were put to death who were actually innocent?
Right. And all these conservatives who are so pro-death penalty, I always say to them, because conservatives, not to the extent that libertarians are certainly, but conservatives also tend to believe that government's too big, can't be trusted, can't do anything
right. So they claim.
Right. Yeah. The government's bad. And yet, but when it comes to this one thing, when it comes to convicting people of murder, they never get that wrong.
It's ridiculous. It's Mark, my co-host, says, he likes to say, and I think it's a good point, is that like a conservative claims they like smaller government until the government agent has a gun. As soon as the government agent has a gun, whether it's prison guards, police, military, then border patrol, then it's we need to increase the budgets on those bureaucracies. There's no consistency.
That's
there.
right. Big government conservatives.
Yeah.
They're out there. There's a lot of them. I wish we had more time, Ian. This has been great, but we're out of time. But listen to, of course, Ian Freeman on Free Talk Live daily, literally daily, 7 days a week.
That's right.
7 to 10 p.m. You can find it, of course, at lrn.fm, or you can find it, of course, on ipmnation.com.
Yeah.
If you go to actually ipmnation.com/FTL, you'll find links to the live show. And, of course, we run a replay of it on the live station on IPM Nation every morning from the previous night's show. So you can catch it there as well. And don't forget, of course, we have the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed. Jen and I will be on there tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern on both IPM Nation and DKRN.FM. DKRN for one more night, and then it's off to Ohm Times Radio. So that's going to be very exciting. That'll be next week. And if you're watching us live today, today's show will be up and available on demand online at IPM Nation by 10 p.m. tonight. And I will be back at 6 p.m. for Rock, Paper, Hand Grenades. Gary is off having eye surgery, so I will be with the Honorable John Heichel, and I have no idea what we're going to talk about there or who our guest is or whatever, but it'll be fun. Maybe it'll just be John and I don't know, but that's the adventure of it all. So Ian, thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and we'll talk at you all a little bit later. Thanks, everybody.